We are quickly coming into the fall season all across the country. Well, that means in most bodies of water, the bass are going to start to change their forage base, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Hi there, welcome to the Bass Fishing Life. I'm your host, Steve Rogers. Before we get into the video, make sure that you punch that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and if you like what's going on, hit the like button, add a comment, share the video, helps us out here. Thank you so much. Well, today we're going to start to talk about how bass change their forage base from spring, summer type situations and into what's happening in the fall. Now, don't get me wrong, bass still eat very similar types of forage all throughout the year, but as we get into the fall, there's a noticeable difference because bass really start to key in on bait fish, and if you have shad in your reservoirs, lakes, ponds, they're gonna really start to target those particular forage bases. They will still eat crawdads, and your jigs and those types of things are still gonna work. So what does that do for the bass as far as their location? Well, the most noticeable difference is they could pull off of the banks, pull off of that visible cover, and they're gonna start to follow these schools of bait fish all over the lake. It does not matter where that school of bait fish is, those bass are going to be following it. So you may find a good school of 2, 3, 4 pound largemouth out in the middle of the lake. Well, how do we target those particular fish? Well, there's a couple things that you're gonna do. There's a whole nother video that we could do as far as targeting offshore schooling fish and the things to look for. But today what we're gonna focus on is fishing soft jerk baits still up near the shoreline and those first structure breaks. So let's go ahead and go over the 3 types of soft jerk baits that I like to use, how I rig them up, and a presentation that is so effective in the late summer and through the fall. Well, the first one that we have here is actually a paddle tail. As you can see, it has a paddle tail on here. Very effective style. This is a straight tail jerk bait. And then this one here is really been popular the last few years. This has also got a paddle tail on it, but it is ribbed on here. Okay, this one is the Rage Swimmer. And these ribs give off a totally different vibration and sound. I used to like to use this one when the water's a little bit dirtier. Well, let's go back to the first paddle tail here on this caffeine shad. As you can see, I've got a hook on here, just Texas rigged, but I have got a belly weight. This is just a small little 1/8 ounce weight that I have clipped onto the shank of the hook, and I really like how this particular weight pulls the bait down just evenly, so it'll drop more horizontally as opposed to a straight up nosedive. And the reason I like that is a lot of times if you've seen bait fish that are starting to die, they will drop, you know, kind of more horizontal, then kick up, and then kind of drop back down and kick up. So this one, it'll drop down a little more horizontal than if you have a Texas rig on here. It's also very easy to use some pliers, pull these weights off, put some heavier weights on, so you can work all different depths of the water column. The straight-tailed soft jerk bait is absolutely my favorite for mimicking what I like to call the fleeing bait fish or the fleeing bait fish presentation. If you've ever seen bass chasing minnows, those minnows will skip across the surface of the water and actually leave the water quite often. And that is what I like to use with this particular presentation, is I will skip it, and I'll show you here just in a second, and let it really pop out across the surface of the water. And this one, being weightless, will sink very, very slowly. So this straight tail I use for a very specific presentation, the fleeing bait fish presentation. And the third way that we would hook one up is with a standard Texas rig. And if I had the Texas rig, so if it wasn't weightless, but I put my bullet weight or worm weight in front of it, okay, and then I had the Texas rig presentation, the nice thing about this is as we cast it out there, that weight is just going to run down the line and then pull down to the bottom, and then the soft jerk bait is just going to kind of float down like this behind it. It gives a kind of a nose dive dying type of an action. So if you find that the bite is not in a horizontal drop, maybe they want that bait spiraling down, and that's going to happen with a traditional Texas rig. So 3 very different presentations that you can try in the late summer and fall. So let's go ahead and we're going to stand up here in just a second and show you some of these presentations as we go, so you can get a good idea of how I go ahead and present these to the fish. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, the first one that we are going to throw here is the paddle tail with the belly weight on the shank of the hook. And first off, these soft jerk baits, when you've got that weight like that, man, you can cast them a mile, which is really awesome. Now, if you notice on my retrieve, with that paddle tail, I can just retrieve it straight like this. That's absolutely fine, and it's going to work. Vary your speed, bring it a little quicker. You can fish it slowly. Make sure you always alter your presentation until you figure out what the fish want. But I like to give that paddle tail just a little bit of a twitch as well, just to mix it up. I always like to try to get that reaction strike whenever I can. So if a little twitch in there, and if you've got a fish following it, you know, a bass coming up behind it and kind of taking a look, you can give it a twitch, and it might be just enough of a different action to get them to react and to hit it. But that is the paddle tail. It's just a super simple presentation. It's very effective. The nice thing about this paddle tail like this is you can fish this in just a wide range of depths. I mean, I can keep the lure up in the top of the water column, but if you have a clear water, a lake or reservoir that you're fishing, those fish will see it from a long ways down and they will come get it. So it's just a really good bait to use in a huge variety of situations. And it's hard to mess up the presentation on this. If you have somebody fishing with you that has not been bass fishing a lot, this is an excellent bait to go ahead and get them started with. Just a simple paddle tail, tell them throw it out, reel it back, twitch it once in a while, and they should have some luck with it. So that's the first one, the paddle tail with the weight on the shank of the hook. Now we are jumping to the straight tail soft jerk bait. This one's caffeine shad again, and this one is weightless, no weight on it whatsoever besides the weight of the hook. And once again, with the salt, the heavy salt in here, you can cast these so far, and they work really well for skipping up underneath brush. All kinds of excellent ways that you can use this weightless soft jerk bait. Now, if you notice this one, my presentation is completely different. I am jerking it very much like you would a hard jerk bait, and my goal is to get that reaction bite. Now, if I'm going to do that fleeing baitfish presentation like we were talking about, I'm going to throw it out there and I'm going to put the rod tip really high, and I'm going to skip that bait across the surface. I want to splash and imitate that minnow coming across the surface. Super, super great way to get a reaction strike. The only trick to this one is you're going to have to wait just a second as that bass scoops that up and pulls some of that slack line. So you got to wait just a touch before you rear back and set the hook. But when you have a bait fish that is skipping, a minnow is skipping, that just triggers that feeding instinct. And even on some really tough days, that might be the ticket to get the fish that maybe somebody else isn't. So that's a weightless jerk bait with a fleeing bait fish presentation, or you can dead stick it and really let it sink there as well, like it's a bait fish just dying all the way to the bottom. But that fleeing bait fish is such a good way to trigger a strike, or at least have a fish show itself. Now, the last one that we're going to show you here in the water is back with the straight tail soft jerk bait, but it's Texas rigged. And if you take a look here, you can see how that weight will slide down and then that bait will drop down nose first. So that's a completely different presentation. If they don't want that horizontal drop, sometimes they like that bait spiraling down, which it will do on a traditional Texas rig. So those are 3 different presentations you can give with 3 different types of soft jerkbaits. The paddle tail, then you have the straight tail, and then you have the paddle tail with the ridges, or like the Rage Swimmer type of a bait that just gives off a whole different vibration in the water that those lateral lines on those bass will pick up, definitely. I hope that this short video on fishing soft jerkbaits will give you some confidence if you've never tried it before, and maybe if you have fished a soft jerkbait quite a bit in the past, that between these 3 different ways to rig it and the presentations, that you can add another trick to your toolbox and go out there this late summer and fall and really hammer those largemouth or smallmouth as they're starting to school up and fatten up for the winter time. Don't forget, go out and encourage somebody today. You never know how you're going to change their life. For the bass fishing life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.